Thank you. I am really looking forward to particularly the questions because I think for me at least, the best part of presenting my work anywhere is that when I get a lot of good questions and I do not have the answer, the beauty of not knowing the answer. So some of the things that already Professor Banks have mentioned about me, but particularly in Bangladesh, I was involved as an educator. So I looked into, in a post-colonial context of Bangladesh, how the education was profoundly shaped by our colonial past and how it continues to uh, exercise epistemic violence. So my PhD research is in Canadian context, and we work with Indigenous communities in Canada in three different communities. As part of the commitment of decolonizing research, we're not able to share any of the data. I'm going to share some of my personal experiences without mentioning any specifics. But once our findings are presented to the communities, and when the communities feel that we have represented and they agree with us, only then we're able to publish, we're able to present, and I think that is fantastic. And in the research context, at least the indigenous communities have been brutally exploited. And if you look at the history, not only in Canada, in other parts of the world as well. So my research is actually about the indigenous food sovereignty in Canadian context, and particularly trust. So how, when we go to indigenous communities, or for that matter, any communities, how does it impact the communities? Are we aware about our own subjectivity? Are we aware about our own blind spots? And just moments ago when Kevin mentioned, and I hope Kevin asked me a lot of difficult questions, one thing that I have learned very, very well working with indigenous communities, the ability to sit in the discomfort, the ability of not knowing the answer and not looking for a quick solution to the problems. I think particularly in the community development practices, we have almost like an instinct to try to solve the problem right away. And that isn't always expected. So I'm going to give you a bit of background, at least in Canadian context. In the context of food research, there are other very devastating exploitative experiences of research in Canada. So this is a picture of where in the residential schools where the indigenous communities children were forced to attend, and a nurse is taking blood sample, and this was an article published in CBC. This was a nutrition experiment in the residential school. This is a time when, right after the Second World War, when the Nuremberg trial was done, the strong research ethics was established around the world that before you do a research, you have to make sure that it goes through the research ethics board and what have you. But at that time, the residential school kids, they were experimented on. They were not aware what was the experimentation on, and even they were deliberately starved to see the consequences of starvation on the children. So this is one of the examples that the experiments of indigenous children are the gross violation of ethics and responsibility. So this is the only picture that I'm going to share because my personal picture and two of my researchers on the left of me is Paul. He's also an international student. He's from Ghana, and on the right is an indigenous elder from Canada. And I have learned so much from him. And one of our colleagues recently defended her thesis, and she mentioned something that things that I have learned in classroom, what I have learned from the indigenous elders are much more than what I have learned from the classrooms of my graduate degree. So I want to start my presentation with the point of trust. Now, the trust scholars, how they define trust. Trust is very difficult to define. Trust isn't something that is straightforward. And one of the earliest scholars of trust, Georg Simmel, he defines trust as almost like a quasi-religious, psychosocial, quasi-religious attribute of us. It's not quite irrational. It's not entirely, we cannot command trust. We cannot will trust. It is just a feeling. But on the other hand, trust is incredibly important. What does trust mean? Let's say when I trust you, I'm willing to be vulnerable to you. I am willing to take the risk to open myself. I know there could be consequences for trusting you, but yet I'm willing to take that risk. Now, it is impossible for us to operate even a single hour without trust. It's not that we only trust people, we trust systems, we trust institutions. We know over and over again when there is a financial collapse, when there is recession, we're surprised as if it was not supposed to happen. So we not only trust people, and particularly with the recent globalization and development, we are almost the Becker's risk society. We have no choice but to trust. The society has become so complex, but yet interconnected. So this is one of the books that I would request any of you, if it is possible, to read. And you will almost your skin will crawl to see that what has been done to the indigenous communities, particularly in the aspects of food. It is not only in Canada, the country where I come from, Bangladesh. In 200 years of history, I was giving this presentation to one of the graduate class at University of Guelph, and the students were shocked that in 200 years of history, 65 million peoples in the Indian subcontinent lost their lives. So, and just wrap your head around it. Right before the British left, where I'm from, Bangladesh, Bengal, nearly 3 million people died. So weaponizing food as a colonial tool is nothing new. It's not specifically to Canada. It's all over the world. So what the settler colonizers did in Canada, and particularly in North America, when they came here, they realized that controlling the indigenous people who knew their land very well wasn't easy. But what they figured out that if they could destroy their food systems, that would be the way to compel them to submit to signing in so many agreements that were built on lies and deceptions and outright blatant deceptions, what have you. And the scale of deception, even if you to this day, that what is happening in Canada, it is built on that deception. Now, where it gets tricky is we need to understand when we go to our community anywhere, what are the factors that influence our trust? Obviously, there's one aspect is as a person, who am I? What shapes my perspective? I wish I had a better translation from Bangla. So in our culture, we say that we don't see through our eyes, we see through our thoughts. We think we see through our eyes, but no, we see through our thoughts. And one of my mentors and very dear professors in Canada, a Black Canadian scholar, cited one of the sociologists saying that a lot of the times in development practitioners, when we go to the community, at times, not everybody, but there are examples where we probably don't want to get too theoretical. So in one of the classes, he was telling that, theory is such a thing, is that if you don't know how to wield theory well, the theory will wield you. So there isn't anything that we do that is not connected to theory, but we just may not know. So the factors that influence trust, obviously, individually, who am I, and interpersonal dynamics. I can give you one quick example that when we go to the community, our team is a mixture of people of different background. Some of us are people of color, Black, people from Latin America, and we have some of our colleagues are from Canada, who are white Canadians. The response of the indigenous communities to our different research participants is visible. And our principal investigator is a Peruvian scholar in Canada. And in fact, that when we go to the community, because of us not being white, we are accepted very well. and the instinctive fear, distrust towards white people in the indigenous communities, the palpable distrust towards the indigenous community is very understandable. And I think when I talk about interpersonal dynamics, it is important for us not to take it personally, to understand that what is the historical context that has happened with these communities. Obviously, institutional influences, that how it shapes trust, and systems, whether it is financial system, whether it is health system, whether it is other policies, and what have you. So here, one of the things, if there's one thing from this slide that I want you to take into consideration, that whenever we go to a community, it is important for us to understand that what is the worldview of that community. Nobody, and it was obviously one of the prominent tools of epistemic violence, is to present the Eurocentric epistemology as objective, as this is the knowledge that is accurate. And if we look at the philosophy of science, history of science, that colonialism wouldn't be possible. And I have a slide after a few slides, that without the epistemic dimension of it. So it is important for us to understand that what worldview is operating in that community, and am I blind in my conviction about my practices? Sometimes our conviction becomes the most stubborn form of blindness, that we don't want to see the other side, particularly coming from academia. And I can tell you one example, again, from my personal experience, that my mother is a woman who doesn't know how to read and write. She and we come from one of the most impoverished areas of Bangladesh, where starvation is very common. I have lost siblings in childhood, and it wasn't because of anything, but just purely malnutrition. So my mother has raised 14 children with almost nothing. But my mother doesn't know how to read and write. She's an incredibly intelligent and educated woman, but she will fight tooth and nail to tell you that, no, I'm not educated because I don't know how to read and write. And I find this is a good example of epistemic violence, that what is knowledge counted as? So this is the worldview difference in a slide that I hope that all of us can easily relate to. On the left, the triangle relates to the egocentric, the Eurocentric worldview, where the world is organized in some kind of hierarchy. At the top is human, and at the bottom, you have all other forms of life. So that is the worldview, the Western worldview, the scientific worldview, or the conventional standard research worldview that we have. But if you go on the right, that is, the word is kin, relation. So kin-centric worldview. In the indigenous worldview, you are not superior or inferior. You are connected to all forms of life. So therefore, in the languages of many indigenous communities, they will tell you the salmon population. You would be like, okay, salmon is a fish. How is it a population? Or they would tell you that we consider seeds as our ancestors, or trees as our extended family. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Where we are trained in conventional academia, and we go to the community and we hear their worldview, immediately we have a tendency to fall back, like, okay, what are you talking about? How could salmon be people, or trees be part of the family, right? So from this slide, I have to go through the slides because I really okay. I want you at least to look at the graphics, if not the points. So this is a slide that I hope you will take a few seconds to pay attention to. That here I make a distinction between indigenous food sovereignty and broader food sovereignty. So anybody looking into food sovereignty, they would know that the food sovereignty movement, La Via Campesina, I'm not probably pronouncing it right, emerged out of when the nation or the state was failing consistently to ensure food security. And there, the food discourses emerged that, okay, where people got together to make sure that food is a right. So in the broader food sovereignty, food is seen basically as a right discourse. But on the indigenous food sovereignty, it's very different. In the indigenous worldview, there is no distinction between people and the land. People are the land. And you will not understand that what food means to indigenous people if you don't understand their worldview. To indigenous people, food is not just food, source of nutrition. It is a way of relating to each other. It is a way of building sociality. To indigenous peoples, food is sacred. Food cannot be commodified. So if you look at the world, and I often give this reference that in a great transformation of Polanyi, that the commodification of land, the commodification of human labor or food, it's a very recent phenomenon. And it has permeated our imagination, our thinking. And I often give the reference of the very potential book for us to understand the capitalist realism of Mark Fisher, is that it is possible for us to imagine the end of the world, but to think beyond the capitalist paradigm in our mind looks like almost impossible. So how is trust and indigenous food sovereignty related here? So when I say that food in the indigenous community is very different, and if you look at the trust dynamics here, this is one of the most widely circulated model of understanding trust. And if you look at on the left, that trust and trustworthiness, they are different. I may trust people without examining their trustworthiness. So what is trustworthiness? Is that, okay, in order to trust somebody, I need to consider three things: their ability. For example, if I need a surgery, I'll not go to my best friend. I'll go to a doctor because of their ability. Second, what is the intention of the person? I probably wouldn't go to a doctor who doesn't have a good intention towards me. That what is the intention of that person? And third is integrity, that if I look at the history, if I look at this institution's background, what has it done? And the fourth component is, as a person, that who I am, what is my likeliness? What is my propensity to trust you? Now that depends on my experiences, my ontology, that how have I been treated? Like if you look at the recent phenomena of distrust, for example, in COVID situation, that, or let's say the Black communities in America, their general fear towards the medical institutions, what, if I'm not wrong, it's called iatrophobia, fear towards the medical institutions. Why? Because when they have in their history the experience of Tuskegee experiment, they have in their history that Black women were tested upon by white doctor to advance in the gynecology and all of that. So when they have been experimented on, when indigenous people have been experimented on for so long, it is not surprising that they would have a propensity not to trust outsiders. So if you just think about these three things, like ABI, ability, benevolence, integrity, from this consideration, if you look at the academic institutions of Canada, I don't think that there are a lot of reasons to trust, because obviously academia has some of the proven capacity to do well, but have we succeeded in terms of communicating our intention well? Or what is the track record that we have? In the past, when research upon research was done, where indigenous people were just treated as something to experiment it on, to extract, and not to think about the reciprocity, relationality, responsibility, why they should trust us. And then when we go to research in this community, and if they're hostile or not particularly connected to us, we feel surprised. I won't explain this particular diagram very well, because prior to coming to Canada, my previous training, obviously coming from the global South, we are very influenced by post-colonial theory and other liberatory theories, Marxist theories and Western liberatory theories. But what was humbling for me to come into Canada is to understand that how even well-meaning academics, researchers with good intention can become complicit in committing epistemic violence and contributing to further dispositions of indigenous people. Here, I want us to pay attention that how the settler colonialism is connected to external colonialism and global colonialism, globalization at a global scale. How is it so? So, quickly speaking, that I'm from Bangladesh. I'm not supposed to be here. So what is my trajectory that I came from a country that was a colony for about 200 years? How did I get in here? So we all know the capitalist accumulation by dispossession. So what capitalism is very good at doing is pretty much going somewhere and displacing, uprooting the existing social relation, socio-ecological relation, existing ways of organizing the society to create a kind of social dynamics that facilitates the profit generation. Now, when we have settler colonialism in places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, these places, here, the extraction happens in the settler colonies by continuous and ongoing disposition. There is no such thing called post-colonialism in Canada or Australia or New Zealand or United States. This is happening right now. So by framing what is happening in Canada from the post-colonial theory, we are in a way invisibilizing, marginalizing the perspectives of the indigenous communities. The indigenous scholars are telling you that look at our experiences from what they call grounded normativity. Are you standing in the ground and look at the world from our perspectives? So I don't have a lot of time. I want this slide for us to pay attention to, that how does settler colonialism works? I have taken this is an adapted diagram from one of the famous papers. It's called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. So decolonization has been adopted by academia, by many institutions, almost like a practice, like decolonizing pretty much everything. What does it mean? So for example, in Canada, pretty much any program that begins here, we say we'll start by land recognition. So what is land recognition? It is nothing but a performative, reconciliatory gesture to virtue signal. Just because we're saying we recognize we are working in this land, yada, 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 does it mean that we are returning the land to them? No, it is rubbing a salt to the wound already that, okay, I'm sorry, I've taken your land, but I'm not going to give it back to you. Sorry. So what does it do? So regarding trust, we need to pay attention to something, that if something happens and trust gets broken, if I want to rebuild that trust, if you see signs in me that I am yet continuing the old practices of exploitation, the distrust even further depends. The possibility of trust just goes. So in settler colonial context, there's three dimensions. One is racial dimension, the other one is epistemic dimension, the other one is post-political economic dimension. That in Canada, the dispossession of indigenous people and the dispossession of the non-white migrants, one of the indigenous scholars calls us arrivant, that we need to recognize that all the settlers, including the racialized settlers, we are here and we are contributing to the ongoing dispossession and displacement of the indigenous peoples. Now, indigenous scholar Eve Tuck, she offers us that solidarity on the ethics of incommensurability. So what does it mean? I might say to the indigenous scholars that, hey, I'm also marginalized by the current economic global political system, or let's say a queer population, or the women, or all the other marginalized groups, the intersectionality. They might say, we are also marginalized. So what the indigenous people are saying, that yes, we are connected into an interlocking system of exploitation under the capitalist paradigm, under the matrix of capitalist colonial system. But that doesn't mean that we need to equate one oppression with the other. So indigenous scholars are saying that when we equate the violence of settler colonialism with, let's say, with misogyny, with other kinds of marginalization, the agenda or the reality of settler colonialism becomes invisibilized. So they tell us to do two things, and which is very difficult, I would say. They tell us to be comfortable being uncomfortable. What is happening? Oh, sorry. So that paper tells us, this particular slide, I think if you look at the slide on the right, again, that what the non-indigenous scholars might, or definitely from this diagram, that commit epistemic violence in the context of food sovereignty. The broader food sovereignty scholars, who are not looking from the ground normativity perspective, they don't take into consideration the land, that there is no people without the land. Indigenous people are land. That is their version. It is all about the land. Land has been commodified. So on the right, you will see that their analysis, recognition, discussions goes up to the point where relationship to land is not recognized. But then what's happening? The non-indigenous scholars are theorizing the marginalization subjectivity of the indigenous people, not taking into consideration what land means to indigenous people. So that theorization, that epistemic production further contributes to the disposition of marginalization of the indigenous people. But on the left, you see that the analysis goes towards the land. That's it. You know, it's not like 1/3 or 1/2. We need to go all the way down to the land. So again, what does it mean to be an indigenous person? And here is a diagram that I developed for my work, for my research, that there is an irreconcilable trust gap, and that is emerging from epistemic differences. On the left, you see the indigenous community, and they are going up to the land. But on the right, the non-indigenous scholars, they are discussing right discourses, political economic discourses, but not looking at land. So then that becomes a bridge that is in progress, but it's not possible to bridge because it's a different worldview. So that is why the non-indigenous scholars, even well-meaning scholars, can contribute in epistemic violence. If you look at this diagram, that if we look at on the left and on the right, when we go to the indigenous communities, are we ready to be okay being discomfortable, not knowing? Are we okay to see that so far we have operated in a world that is egocentric? If you see on the right, the triangle at the bottom is the individual. But on the top is ecocentric. And in the middle, we have anthropocentric and we have biocentric. Now, to transition from egocentric to ecocentric, to take into consideration that we need to transfer from Western understanding of systems thinking to relational systems thinking is a major feat. It's not easy. It's like examining each piece of us and to be humbled by our own unknowing state that I don't know. And that puts us in a profoundly uncomfortable position, and that is pedagogy of discomfort. So this is one of the diagrams that I have developed for my research, that what indigenous food sovereignty means, what is important, and what can actually potentially produce a sustainable food sovereignty. Here you will see that usually the broader food sovereignty scholars, they don't take into consideration the indigenous identity, what is needed for cultural sovereignty. So the state, a settler colonial state, cannot let indigenous people be indigenous, because to be indigenous means not to do agriculture. To be indigenous means that they will go hunt and harvest. That's their food practices. To be indigenous means not to commodify food. To be indigenous means that they are allowed to go out in the land and not restricted in the reserve. So when we keep our discussion in the paradigm of nutrition, right discourses, And the other discourse is not taking into consideration of indigenous identity. We do not, and this is I'm still in progress. It's still not done. If you consider on where in the orange it is written, indigenous settler trust and solidarity to transform industrialized food system, means as settlers, are we willing to give up settler futurity, not taking into consideration, okay, I have a land, I own that land, but actually land cannot be owned. Am I willing to give up my ownership to land? Am I willing to take into consideration that once the indigenous resurgence, indigenous sovereignty is established, I do not know whether I will be allowed to stay here as a guest or I'll be asked to leave. So that profound uncertainty in the settlers create this discomfort that, what do you mean that, I will have to give up my rights? What do you mean that indigenous people's right to land? So whether we go to a community to help them to produce food, to make them nutrition sufficient, or to build capacity in our terms, whose terms it is in. So are we actually establishing trust? Do they know that have we through consistent effort take it that when we go to the community we'll be distrusted, and they have reasons to distrust us, but are we consistently proving that we are here to build relationality? We are here that you and I are in the same boat. It's not that I jump in the parachute researchers. I go, I collect my data, I write my paper, I defend my dissertation, voila, done. No. I mean, when I'm writing, am I writing for the community? So let's say you can go to indigenous community and like, okay, we tried to build a food system, but they don't want to participate. That's it. But on the other hand, if you look at, okay, why? What's going on? What's the history? And in all of that. My time is up and I will stop there. And I'm really looking forward to some difficult, uncomfortable question. And I hope that I can go from this presentation not knowing a lot of questions answered.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Firoze. So let's give you a virtual clap from the audience there. I think you've given us a lot of challenging questions, challenging ideas to try to get our heads around, haven't you? It's a complex and ethically challenging area of research, which raises so many issues about the dominance of Western knowledge and how people, as me, for example, schooled in Western traditions, can actually take ourselves out of that paradigm, be more humble, and think of what we're doing in terms of epistemic justice, injustice, or violence, as you've used the term. So thank you very, very much for raising those issues, particularly in the context of food sovereignty. Would anybody like to make a comment or ask a question? Any reflections on what Firoze has said so far? Yes, Sharon.
Hi, Firoze. Thanks a million. That was super interesting. I took a few photographs of some of your slides, if that's okay.
Yeah, yep.
I suppose what strikes me is with good intention as a researcher, the worldview, even if I do manage to translate, to understand, to perceive, and to get the people that I'm working with to also perceive and to start kind of cross-pollinating our worldviews, or our indigenous worldview and my worldview. There's also the issue, particularly with food sovereignty. It's not my speciality, but I have done some work in it, of like big business interests and political and power interests, and how no matter what I do or say, that's in the background. And indigenous people know that too. They're not stupid. So how do we address those problems?
Yeah, this is $1 million question, and I love it. One of the challenges that when we go to indigenous communities, at least in Canada, you will see that indigenous people, I mean, if you visit indigenous communities, I mean, at least for me, I come from a very, very humble background. You will not, you will struggle to believe your eyes that this is Canada. It's a different Canada. It's a different Canada. And the food industry, particularly the global food industry, its influence and its ability to control the government. So we do know that there's a fascinating book coming from University of Columbia, Catherine Pistor. The book is called Code of Capital, that the capitalist logic is embedded in the Constitution. So it's not the state is there to protect the interest of the people. And this is challenging. I thank you for that good question. You see, the entire food industry is operating under Westphalian sovereignty, which is an idea that came from Europe, right? But indigenous people, they're saying the resurgence is about saying, no, I don't recognize to Westphalian sovereignty, because there's a particular movement in and one other thing which is very inspiring, that indigenous food sovereignty is used as a decolonizing tool. You know, it's not only about food, it's about their right to exercise their food practices. It's about their right to practice their relationality. In Canadian context, the settler government used agriculture, food production as a context to dispossess indigenous people. How so? They came here and they saw, oh, there's a vibrant community here. They are doing fantastically well. So how are we going to dispossess them? Oh, they don't use the land as we do in Europe. So it was the excuse of European agriculture that was done to dispossess the indigenous people. Because indigenous people's relations with the ecology is that it's a relationality, is that what can we do, what we take from the nature and give it back so that we live in harmony. I'm not romanticizing indigenous communities. I'm not saying that they didn't have their own challenges. No, I mean, that's a trap, again, to fall into that. So if we try to wrap our head around it, is that one is Westphalian sovereignty, where state is on top of everything. And then the indigenous people are calling for relational sovereignty that accommodates multiple sovereignties. It is place-based sovereignty. I'm in a place, you're in a place, there are plants, there are trees, there are all forms of life. To recognize that each forms of life have their sovereignty. Therefore, it is my responsibility, this is the indigenous worldview, as a steward, to relate to them that, oh, this is not just a piece of land that, you know, I will just produce food. No, because we know that the neoliberal food industry always uses this excuse that we have to feed 10 billion people. Let's go and build all the technological solutions. No, we produce more food than the world needs already. That's not what is happening. And what is happening, even in Canada, because the climate is changing, it's getting warmer. So the land mass that was previously not ready for growing, so the industries are moving in. How are they moving in? Using all kinds of excuses. Oh, we are here to do precision agriculture. We have this drone technology and all of these genetic. Yes, you have those technologies. I don't doubt about it. But what is the modality? What operates that industry? It isn't the knife. There's a saying in my village. It's about like how you use a tool. For example, again, roughly translating that a murderer and a doctor, they both use knife. One saves a life with a knife and one takes life with a knife. It isn't technology. We're trying to solve a social problem with technical solution that has always been that Eurocentric modality of solution. So, and what is particularly happening that the trifecta development model, particularly in food industry, you see in the agriculture industry, they're doing all kinds of development, but they're doing packed with the university, especially after the Bay and Dole Act, that if you are developing a technology in the university, that can be sold into the market. So now you have the government, the university, and the industry. They're all in together. So So how do you do it? Yes, it is a very challenging question. There is one answer. And it is very difficult, very difficult. One indigenous scholar, Leanne Simpson, she writes that I have read enough post-colonial theory. I have read enough Western liberatory theory, critical theory. Yes, they are incredibly good tool to analyze. But what it does not give us hope. So she is inviting us to the pedagogy of hope. She is inviting us to get into the boat, knowing that we are all in this together. When they climb, you may do all kinds of discrimination in terms of organizing the political economy of the world, but when the world is collapsing because of climate change, it is very democratic. It's not going to leave any of us behind. So it's actually understanding. It's like, so there's a concept called indigenous resurgence, where everyday practices becomes a subversion, like choosing to defy, and this is not always safe. Let's not forget that here in the indigenous land, the indigenous people regularly put their life on the line to protect the water, to protect the land, and their lives are lost. So that's a challenging situation. So it's that pedagogy of hope. It's like embodying that resurgence every day, practicing that resurgence every day, whether it is language, whether it is food practices, whether it is relationality. How do I look at you? If I look at you in terms of the capitalist modality, oh, what can I get from you? That is not relationality. That's an exchange, right? So I feel very hopeful about it. And it doesn't put me into the endless cycle of analysis paralysis.
Good. Well, thank you. That's a relief to move to hope. But I think you're absolutely right. It's important because we can get very mired down and thinking, well, this is the world we live in. How can we fight global capitalism? But if we don't, and in fact, it will implode, hopefully, and we should come out better. Any other reflections or comments for Firoze? Just turn your microphone on and speak if you would like to say something.
Hello. Hello, I hear you, gentlemen, about the context you mentioned. And if this research is conducting accordingly, in terms of application, when it comes to my country, I don't think this will solve the problem we are facing, more especially the problem of the indigenous communities. Why? Because our nation, or I can say our country, is multi-dimensional country, and we have a lot of indigenous religion. So that problem cannot allow us to even try to raise up this issue and address it in our country. So as a student of community development, I would like to have more insight about this project so that I will use it in future to see how I can help my community as well as the nation.
I think we're losing you a little bit, so let's,
if possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You get that, Firoze.
Yeah. Approximately, but I'm also that's a beautiful question. Thank you very much. That what we do. I found something in the indigenous scholars, like one of the original gangsters of indigenous scholars here, Vine Deloria Jr. One of the central problems of relating to people, relating to the world, one is spatial, the other one is temporal. One is related to space, the other one is related to time. If you look at the community development practices, not only in Canada or all over the world, there is some kind of idea of linear progression, that it's like we are here, we have some place to go, and there is steps and steps of progress to go. So we are here, but we're never here. What does it mean? Means today I am relating to you, keeping in my head some future ideal picture of development. So it's almost like some kind of fanatic ideology that this is the dimension of development that I think is right. You got to do it. Why? Because if you do X, Y, Z, this is going to happen. And we know very well what happened, particularly after the Second World War, in the name of development in so many countries, and how it was a tool for neo-colonial, post-colonial, neoliberal domination. We must not forget structural adjustment policy and all the conditions attached to IMF and World Bank when they extend loan to the third world developing country, where I come from. So we know all of that. So one is temporal. The other one is spatial, tied to the space. When our sense of self, who I am, and this is what the collision of epistemic worldview, it's a different epistemic cosmology. What does it? So, for example, I'll give one. It's a tragic example, but again, it communicates the message very well. So let's say I believe in a certain religious ideology, and I think that if you don't submit to my ideology, then you don't deserve to live. You see, in my conviction, I'm right. Because in my conviction, and this is what I said in my presentation, that conviction is a stubborn form of blindness. So in my head, I have a picture that I'm here. If I do A, B, C, D, I'm going to go there. But if I come to the humility, in indigenous worldview, they have a particular set of philosophies called the 7 grandfather teachings, 7 grandfather or 7 grandmother teachings. So they use a particular, each symbol, animal, to look at the world in one dimension. There's one of them, it's called humility. What is humility means? Means that I am in a community with all of us. If I think that I'm right in my view and my way or the highway, in that case, it is embedded in the culture to put me in my humility. Just like, so the symbol for humility is a wolf. Just as a wolf cannot survive without the collective existence, we cannot exist. So we need each other. If you are interested in one particular Indian philosopher, it's difficult to categorize him. Jiddu Krishnamurti, he has one particular view that we are violent towards each other because we fail to see our relationality. Like you and I are interdependent. It's not that, I am going to make the whole world, like I'll become the Elon Musk and everybody will. No, everybody cannot. It's just that our failure to see our relationality, our interdependence, it's the egocentric worldview that I'm independent. So when you say that there are multidimensional, and you are right, Al-Mansur, in the post-colonial countries, like for example, where I come from, Bangladesh, we have a religious community as well. They are under like double oppression. How double oppression? You have globalized food industries like Monsanto, Bayer, these big corporations. Like there are only a handful of corporations that is controlling the world food supply. A handful of corporations, right? What is it doing? I'm not sure if you're, at least we are aware of it. That how Monsanto tried to patent neem, like a leaf that we have used for thousands of years. They wanted to patent neem that is growing in Bangladesh and India. They wanted to patent basmati rice that is growing. So they wanted to patent a life. And what they're doing right now, and I don't know if any of you would be interested, that particularly in the food spaces, the data colonialism. What is it? All the advanced gadgets of agriculture, like precision agriculture, let's say drone or tractor or all of those, that is going in places like the Global South, because the Global South has higher level of ecological diversity. So right now, the technological vision of the food industry, the agriculture industry is that farming without a farmer, a tractor that can operate without an operator, a drone that can fly over a field and look at things in a microscopic vision, etc. But these precision agriculture, these type of advancement heavily depends on data. So they're sending the equipments in the global south in the name of development. And when they're collecting the ecological data, whether it is biological diversity, genetic diversity, soil moisture, everything, it is updating, it is uploading in the cloud. And believe it or not, if you buy one of those equipment and if you try to open it, you bought it, you'll be sued. So what's happening is that the coloniality has moved into different dimension. So to answer your question, Al-Mansur, that are we able to see our relationality? Are we able to see our interdependence? Are we able to transition from egocentric, that I am the center of my existence, to eco-centric, where we are an interconnected wave of life, where we are interdependent? We were never independent. We were always interdependent. It's our inability to see our interdependence that makes us violent.
Okay, now I'm wondering whether you'd like to carry on in the main group or whether you'd like to have 15 minutes or so in smaller groups just to look at some of the issues. There was a couple of questions that Firoze had suggested, and I put those in the chat, which are just about carrying on the discussions, but with 2 or 3 people. Well, it'd be about 4 people in a group. Has anybody else got a burning question they'd like to ask now, or would you like to go into breakout groups? Any thoughts? Well, I think we'll give you the option to go into breakout groups. Okay, welcome back, those of you who still remain. As always happens, and I'd sort of forgotten that, a lot of people leave at the point where we have breakout groups, partly because they've got other things to do, but we had a nice little discussion in our group, and Firoze, we had 2 groups. You were in a second group. So shall we just use the last 8 or 9 minutes just to reflect on, did anything come up in the groups that was particularly interesting or challenging? Firoze, would you or anybody else who was in your group like to make a few comments about ideas that came up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our group, both Mario and Anna and Al-Mansur, Ibrahim, they shared very important things. Particularly, Anna was, what struck with me with Anna is that her experience working in the field, that she is working in Portugal, if I'm not wrong, for past 10 years, where because of gentrification, people had to leave and come and make a new community. So as very expected that people coming from different perspective, different worldview, there will be a lack of trust. Mm. On the other hand, in terms of building trust, I always found the work of Simone Weil very useful, very useful. She talks about a concept called attention and rootedness. So a lot of the theories that we read, they have been written not essentially living the ground, living in the ground, experiencing the ground. So when we go to the field, we need to recognize that the capitalist condition or the neoliberal social matrix that we live every day, that dehumanization, that forces us from being a person to an object. Anna, to your point, that when these people are struggling every day just to make the ends meet. Yeah, I think that is expression. Just to make their ends meet. You know, the first thing that we are compelled to forgo is our opportunity to reflect. It's like almost that survival instinct. So in that situation, to go into a position, for example, you and I are in a conflict and we have to share the same place. It's that spiritual practice. I was mentioning the work of Sandy Grande, a Peruvian indigenous scholar. A famous book she has authored is called Red Pedagogy. It's like a groundbreaking book. She discusses a concept called spiritual sovereignty. That to be able to be in the same space and give my full attention, to be willing to not to see you from my preconceived notion. Like, for example, I go in there, I'm like, okay, for example, in case of Bangladesh, we had a war in 1971 between Pakistanis, at that time, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So later in my life, I worked with a Pakistani colleague, and her first perception about me was that, oh my God, this guy is Bangladeshi. He's gonna hate me, right? And she had that fear towards me, distrust towards me, right? And how in the Western culture, they say breaking the bread together, like being in the same place, sharing our experiences. So that's something. And Mario brought something very important, is that the limitations of post-colonial theory or any of the liberatory theories. Do the indigenous communities have any kind of theoretical paradigm through which they are theorizing their experiences? And we brought the discussion of grounded normativity. Is that, okay, the place you are theorizing, the right to define is very distinct, because not everybody has the right to define. Like we all know the Foucauldian discourse, that power and knowledge, right? So we go to a community, especially if you go from academia, we go from a position of privilege. So when we write something, and Anna brought that point, that when people come and they do the research and they never see what they have written, what they have found, what is the understanding. But Anna, in Canada, one of the things that we are doing, we are trying to move away from the Western paradigm of doing research. So we have our finding, we write our stuff, and this is the other thing. And I studied previously critical sociology, which is demonically complex in language, coming from a different, I know language complexity has its value, has its place, but when we're writing, who are we writing for? Who are we writing for? So writing something in a deceptively simple language is so difficult. I will tell you that I have written and published in sociology. That was easy because that's the language I've been trained in. But when you are writing for an audience and you come to that humility, that, no, I don't know, I don't understand, and sit with that profound discomfort. I don't know the solution. Let's find it out together. So that attention, holding the space, like really that attention, be there, like be there, not in our head. Our head is not a great place to be in, to be very honest, especially if you have stayed in academia for too long. You know that our head is not always our best friend. Is that, can we go into the other ways of being? So the indigenous people keep telling us that there are other ways of being. There are other ways of being. There are other ways of knowing. So, and that takes humility.
Thank you. We had a discussion in our group very briefly. I think the issue of power came up quite a lot. That was a sort of key role. Even if we hadn't experienced all the complexities of working with indigenous communities, we are often researching on and with communities that are in some ways marginalized, disenfranchised, dispossessed, and how do we become more reflexively aware of our own power and willing to give it up, to listen, to step back, etc. So thank you. We're already just got 2 minutes left. So I'd like to thank you very, very much, Firoze. You raised so many issues. And one comment I made in our group was that they are big issues. I mean, you took us to the abstract level in a way. These are the structural issues, but also the philosophical issues that it's important that we're able to reflect and think of, to see ourselves and what we're actually doing on the ground when we are conducting research, and how we do it, who it's for, what change it can possibly make in the world. And I think, you know, research for change is a really, really important idea. We have a plan to have another meeting on Thursday, the 12th of December. And we had a commitment to change the timing because even though I was amazed we got someone from Australia as well as people from other parts of the world, we were suggesting 8 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time. So that'd be 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That might not be so good for some people in the world, but we said we're committed to try to shift the time a little bit for each session. So we'll send you a note about that. We also had an idea. We could ask people, anybody want to present? You've seen how it's happened this time. Anybody would like to present some of their work? Put it in the chat now or send a message to Jessica. Otherwise, I could facilitate a thing called a Dilemmas Cafe. Unfortunately, we only have virtual food and drink. You have to bring your own food and drink, where each of us brings a research dilemma. So a dilemma that we face when doing research. I think that follows on quite nicely today, because today we were looking at kind of huge ethical challenges and dilemmas. So we bring a dilemma, we share them, and then we might choose to study 3 of them. We break up into 3 groups. So it does involve breakout groups. It would involve cameras if possible and microphones. And then we'll discuss, how and why do these arise? How can we respond to them, etc. So if that interests you, we can have a go at that. If there's somebody else who'd like to give a talk, we can do that. So that's a suggestion. So pop any comments in the chat, and I haven't even looked at the chat recently. And Jessica's put her email in there. Okay, so until the 12th of December, at least in some countries, it might not even be the 12th of December because it could be the next day. In places like Australia, it will be the next day, won't it? It'll be the 13th. But thank you again, Firoze. I think you've really forced us to try to think outside our own paradigm, which is almost impossible. You talked about the ethic of incommensurability, and that we didn't get onto that because that is kind of a real challenge, isn't it? Do we believe that we can talk between paradigms or not? But I think you've raised some really important issues. So I'd like to thank you very, very much indeed, and give you a virtual round of applause and wish you all well for the rest of your day, whatever time it is in your country, and hope to see you again soon. Firoze, if you want to have a little debrief, do just stay behind for a few minutes and we can have a
and thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this opportunity. As I said in the beginning, that I love living any discussion where I don't have answers to questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so goodbye, everybody, and hope to see you again.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.